Hello students, today we discuss dominant paradigm, which is the post-war discussion on development, right? And basically not only development but also about development communication. But before that we must understand what do we mean by post-war and what are the implications for that. Right? When we say post-war, we mean the end of the Second World War or the immediate years following the Second World War. But though whenever we say post-war, we mean the end of the Second World War, but while we are discussing development and development communication, we must also take into account the effects of the First World War, because the First and the Second World War were the two most devastating wars that mankind had seen till then, right? And the implications were large. As far as European countries were concerned, because Europe was the theater of the war in both the cases, and these two wars happened in a span of less than 3 decades, the implications for Europe were huge. These were the countries which had experienced the benefits of the Industrial Revolution for almost more than 150 years, and by the time the Second World War ended in 1945, they were shattered. They were shattered economies. At certain point of time, they were the most powerful economies of the world. They were also the colonial powers. They had their colonies across the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia. But by the time the war ended, 1945, the Second World War, they were left shattered in terms of economies. So the beginning of the discussion on development starts from that point of time, right? And then there are two aspects of the development that we will be looking at. The first aspect is about the reconstruction of Europe, the reconstruction of European countries, right, which were shattered, which lost all their affluence, almost all their affluence. And the second aspect of the development is about the colonies which were getting free. I mean, the nations who were getting free, they were getting freedom, right? So they represented a whole set of different requirements to develop, and Europe presented a completely different requirement for their development. And it is in this context that we have to look at what is called the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 in the US, which was attended by most of the prominent economists and sociologists of that time. This was chaired by a person called George Marshall, who was the then Secretary for State of the US. And this Bretton Woods Conference was also attended by someone like John Maynard Keynes, right, who is supposed to be one of the most prominent economists of all time. And in this Bretton Woods Conference, what came as a result of Bretton Woods Conference is something called the Marshall Plan. Now, when we look at development, we have to the dominant paradigm. We say dominant paradigm because this discussion on development remained dominant for quite some time. It remained quite some time relevant for not only European countries but a lot of so-called third world countries. So the Marshall Plan came out as a result of the Bretton Woods Conference, and it was called Marshall Plan just because of the fact that George Marshall chaired this meeting. And two most important global agencies which are still functional and which are very prominent in their functions are IMF and IBRD, which is International Monetary Fund and International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Why we know IMF as IMF, IBRD has a more popular name, and that is called the World Bank. So Marshall Plan, which came out of Bretton Woods Conference, was basically a plan to reconstruct Europe, right? Then a lot of other countries which were becoming colonies were facing other problems. They received a legacy of, say, hunger, of poverty, of low industrial development, agriculture, farm economy, which had a very low level of technology and all that, high mortality rate, right? Almost no education in many parts of the world, Africa, Latin America. Even in terms of, when you look at India, you will realize that the level of literacy was so low when India became free in 1947. So these were some of the basic problems that the third world countries were facing. So while this Marshall Plan was specifically created for European countries, this Marshall Plan was also prescribed for some of these third world countries. So they were told that, look, if you want to develop, if you want to grow, if you want to hit the growth path, if you want to hit the development track, then you have to have the same plan. Now, what was basically the Marshall Plan? Now, the Marshall Plan was, again, there is something that has to be put into context, and that is the US was by this time, by the end of the Second World War, US had become the most powerful economic power in the world, right? And that is because the US industry was growing at this point of time, and this was also one of the most important reasons why US decided to be part of a war which was being fought far from it, right? There's a whole Atlantic Ocean between Europe and America, the United States of America. But in these two wars, not only first but also in the Second World War, the US found an opportunity for its industries, right? Because how do you increase, how do you enhance industries? Because only when you have demand, and when you have demand, your industry will produce more, right? So it was basically how US looked at these two wars as an opportunity, right? So what Marshall Plan basically prescribed was, look, this is the Western style of life, right? Particularly the US style of life, and this is what they were telling to the third world countries, that if you want to grow, if you want to develop, you have to follow this lifestyle, right? So the Western lifestyle became the objective of this dominant paradigm of development communication, that is grow like the West grows. Now, how do you grow? So the concept of economic development at that point of time was growth of economic activities, use of more technology, and this is what was prescribed. Now, this became an objective of development, the sole objective of development, enhancing economic activities and use of more technology. So this was prescribed to the third world countries as something that you need to do if you want to become developed. Now, when we look at development communication, what is it? So you have an objective, this is the development objective. Now, how do you achieve that? How do communication tools will help you in attaining this particular objective, right? So the theories and the models which came out, the theories and models of communication which came out to make you realize this objective and make you attain this objective is known as development communication, right? Or DevCom in short, or even C for D. C as the letter of the alphabet, 4 as in digit, and again D as the letter of the alphabet. So development communication, call it development communication, call it DevCom, or call it C4D. So this is what is meant by development communication, that you have an objective of development. Now, this is what development means for you, and now you decide what are the communication tools that you need to adopt to achieve that development goal. Now, it is in this context that there were some economists who gave quite a few economists who gave the idea, and quite a few communication experts who gave you the idea what kind of a development communication you can have. The three most important persons which we study in dominant paradigm are Daniel Lerner, Wilbur Schramm, and Everett Rogers. While Lerner talked about something called empathy. Empathy is when you look at someone and you are impressed by the lifestyle, then you try to imitate that. So Daniel Lerner said that the mass media can be used to create that empathy among the people of the third world countries, and when they see that the Western people are living their lifestyle like this, they are living their lives like this, the people in the US are living their lives like this, then they will probably try to imitate, and then definitely lead to more economic activities and growth. What Wilbur Schramm said was what is called the magic multiplier. Now, the Shram said that, look, when you are trying to grow, then many people will need different kinds of knowledge. Now, this is the mass media will provide exactly that. So, mass media becomes a magic multiplier. So, the magic multiplier concept is what has been contributed by Wilbur Shram in terms of development communication. And when we come to Everett Rogers, he said something called diffusion of innovation. So, that he said that, look, create that need among the people of these third world countries that they need to innovate, and then that innovation is diffused again through the mass media. So, all these three talked about the use of mass media for attaining what? Development, and development had a very clear-cut definition at that point of time. That is, development is a linear movement. You move from a traditional society to a transitional society and to a developed society, and that developed society is what is, I mean, what is the basically is the Western society or the US society. So, this is how we study dominant paradigm. This in a nutshell is what is called the dominant paradigm of communication. However, the dominant paradigm of communication was criticized on certain issues. So, some of the experts who criticized it and are the famous economist called Gunnar Myrdal as well as Andre Gunder Frank, and they came up with, and those who subscribed to the view of A.G. Frank and Myrdal, they came up with an alternative paradigm which is called the dependency paradigm, right? And they brought into the concept of colonial legacy. They said that, look, the countries which were earlier colonies can't have the same prescription because they have a different society, they have different cultural history, they have different legacy. So, you have to reorient the dominant paradigm. So, dominant paradigm remained strong for 3-4 decades, but there was an alternative paradigm which is called the dependency paradigm. Dependency paradigm also suffered from certain limitations, and the most important limitation, or the weakest point was they did not give you an idea what kind of a communication you need to have, right? So, they only told you the problem with the dominant paradigm, right? So, that's how we look at dominant paradigm, and then maybe more about dependency paradigm sometime later. Thank you very much.